Hey, Chevy, what's up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Pei Gimel, Daf 83 of Masechta Yoma. Chevy, I don't know if you could tell in my voice, but I'm back in Eretz Yisrael. Rachel, that was the secret. The secret was that I was going back to Eretz Yisrael, and I'm here, Lamaisa. Baruch Hashem, made it here. Bought pizza, some other good things. So, Baruch Hashem. Anyways, where am I? Right. Daf Pei Gimel of Masechta Yoma. So Daf Pei Gimel, we talk about when a fellow needs to eat. It starts off, the first part talks about when a fellow needs to eat on Yom Kippur. Interesting discussion there. We get to a new Mishnah, which talks about people who have certain sicknesses. How exactly are you able to feed them? Can you feed them non-kosher food and stuff? Interesting. We get to other sort of interesting discussions around that. So, let us begin on Daf Pei Gimel Amud Aleph, 2 lines on the top. So the Mishnah had said that if you have a fellow who's not well, so it says, or you can feed him based on the advice of doctors, and if there's no doctors, you can listen to him. You can listen to his own preferences. So Omer Reb Yanai says, Reb Yanai Chola Omer, if you have a fellow who's not well, and he says he makes the following assertion: Tzarich, I need to eat. It's Yom Kippur, he says I need to eat. V'rofi Omer Eino Tzarich, and the doctor says, no, you don't need to eat. Shomen L'chola, we listen to the sick fellow. My time Levidei Amaris Nafsho. The reason being that the heart knows the bitterness of his soul. Kilo, a fellow knows if he needs to eat. The doctor, as smart as he is, he isn't the fellow. The fellow knows if he needs to eat or not, so we listen to the fellow. Pshita, isn't this obvious? Well, it's not necessarily so obvious. I might think that Taka, we listen to the advice of the experts. The doctor has seen this a million times. Maybe Taka knows something that the person himself doesn't know, that he doesn't need to eat. So no, Kamashmalan, that we Taka listen to the sick fellow. If he says he needs to eat, he needs to eat. If the doctor says you need to eat, the sick fellow says, no, I don't need to eat. He doesn't want to break his fast. It's Yom Kippur. He says, no, I don't need to eat. Shoman l'rofe, we listen to the doctor, and the fellow eats. My time the answer being that this guy is sick, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Listen to the doctor who has sort of right? Rashi says, tunba, what does Rashi say? Shtus. That because of his sickness, it's affecting his cognitive abilities, and therefore we listen. The doctor says you need to eat, so eat. Tanan, we learn in our Mishnah that if you have a fellow who's not well, so we can give him food to eat based on the advice of doctors. That seems to be implying, wait, we listen to the advice of the doctors, we do not listen to himself. So, if the fellow says, I need to eat, and the doctor says you don't need to eat, so it would sound like from our Mishnah that we listen to the doctors, not to him. And also, our Mishnah says Api B'ki'in. B'ki'in is plural, which sounds like you would need 2 doctors, yet Rabbi Yanai seems to be saying all you need is 1 doctor. So what's going on here? So the Gemara says, well, first of all, when the Mishnah says that we go based on the advice of the doctor, that is not to imply that if he says that he needs to eat and the doctor says that he doesn't need to eat, so we would listen to the doctor and not to him. No, that's not what it means. It means if the fellow, like Rabbi Yanai says, that if the fellow says that he doesn't need to eat and does not need to eat, and the doctor says you do need to eat, so in that case we listen to the doctor. Where am I? Fine. Okay, but still, why should we need, why does the Mishnah say that you need 2 doctors? I mean, Rabbi Yanai was suggesting that maybe all you need is 1 doctor. Interesting. So the Gemara says, when our Mishnah says that you need 2 doctors, that's in a particular case. It's in the case where the fellow says, I don't need to eat, and the fellow even has another doctor, another expert opinion, who says, yeah, you do not need to eat. But then there are two doctors, right? Bikian. There are then two doctors who say you do need to eat. So in that case, we listen to the doctors. But if was it shy of or short of, or in the case where there weren't these two opinions, right? There wasn't the sick fellow who says that he doesn't need to eat, as well as another opinion that says that you don't need to eat. So then you would not need two doctors. So in a regular case, you would only need one doctor. Fine, right? Fine, pshita. I feel like I keep on losing my place. I don't know why. I even have my finger on the place, but I guess fingers aren't always so reliable. Pshita, it's obvious that if you have 2 against 2, you would go based on the opinion that says that he should be eating, because safek nefashos uv safek nefashos lahakol, because it's a case, it's potentially a case of life and death, right? Meaning, obviously, in just a normal case, we would not tell somebody to eat on Yom Kippur. We're talking about a case where it's a serious question of life and death if this fellow should eat. So if you have 2 people who say he should not eat and 2 people says that he should eat, so obviously we're going to follow the opinions that say he should eat because it's safek nefashos. So we say, well, it's talking about a case where there's actually 3 against 2 in favor of not eating. Meaning you have the fellow himself who says he does not need to eat, and he manages to chop another 2 doctors who says he does not need to eat. Then you have another, so now you have like 3 on that team, and now you have another 2 doctors who say that he should eat. So we listen to the 2 doctors. And even though Rav Safra says that when it comes, right, that if you have, that once you get more than 2, so everything's the same. Meaning, right, trei kemev mea ketrei. 2 is the same as 100. 100 is the same as 2, and therefore, you might think, what's the big deal? We're saying that you listen to the ones who say to eat. Basically, when 3 people say don't eat and 2 people say to eat, that's essentially no different than 2 people saying don't eat and 2 people saying to eat, because once you go above 2, it doesn't matter. 2 is the important thing. But that's only the Inyan Eidos. That's only regarding testimony. However, when it comes to evaluations, then we go based on the number of people. Meaning, so when it comes to testimony, so we say, look, whether you bring 100 witnesses, whether you bring 2 witnesses, it really doesn't matter. However, when it comes to evaluations, then, if 3 people give opinion X and 2 people give opinion Y, so that's significant that there's more that are saying X than Y. However, right? But nonetheless, even when we say that when it comes to evaluations, the more evaluations in favor of a certain opinion is relevant, that's only when it comes to evaluating financial things. However, in this case, it's safek nefashos, and even though 3 people are saying he does not need to eat, if 2 people say he does need to eat, so then we're going to feed the fellow, even though there's more opinions supporting the motion not to eat. Nonetheless, he will eat because you have the 2 people saying to eat, and it's safek nefashos lahakol, and there you have that. It's so funny. I feel like this isn't a complicated sugya at the end of the day. I don't know. At the end of the day, like, if the guy needs to eat, he eats. I don't even want me to tell you. But, like, it's just becoming very spaghetti. Wait, why is it 2? Well, because there are 2. What about 3? But the Maisa, if you have an expert opinion saying to eat, so you eat, it sounds like. So let's even go weiter a shtickle. I don't know, unless I'm just reading it wrong, but no, it sounds like safek nefashos lahakol. What do you want me to tell you? If there's an opinion to eat, so you eat, I think. I don't know, maybe you can get like another complicated situation. Like, what if you have 1 doctor against 2? Then I don't know, I don't know, what do you want me to tell you? But let's go weiter, shtickle. But we say, one second. If we continue reading in our Mishnah, it says, Vim ein sham bikiyin, machilin also api atzmo, that if there are no experts, so then we can listen to him. So, Michlal de Reisha Amar Tzarich, that implies that in the Reisha says that Itaka does need to eat. Meaning, we had said, a few minutes ago, that the situation where we listen to the doctor is when the fellow says that he does not need to eat, and the doctor says he does need to eat, so then we listen to the doctor. Right? However, the Gemara wants to say, one second, but then if we continue reading in our Mishnah, it says, Vim ein sham bikin, ma'achilin oso api atzmo. But if there are no doctors to consult with, so then we can listen to him, implying that in the ratio when there is a doctor, even if he says that he does need to eat, we listen to the doctor and not to him. Yet we seem to be saying that if he has an opinion, if he says he needs to eat, he eats. So we say the Mishnah is missing a few words. This is what it should say. When do we say that we listen to the doctor? When he says that he does not need to eat. When he says I don't need to eat. But if the fellow says that he does need to eat, ein sham bikin trei elachad d'amar lo tzarich. If there are not two witnesses who say that he not witnesses, if we're lacking two doctors to say that he does not need to eat, elachad d'amar lo tzarich machilin oso api atzmo. Right. So we said the Mishnah is missing a few words. That we say that when do we listen to him? I'm sorry, when do we listen to the doctors? We listen to the doctors when he says that he does not need to eat and the doctor says that he does need to eat. However, if he says that he does need to eat and you have a doctor who says that he does not need to eat, so then you listen to him. However, if there are two doctors who say that he does not need to eat, so then you would listen to the doctors. Oh my gosh. My Ravashi, Amr says, my Ravashi, Kolecha do Amr tzarech ani. That if the fellow says, I need to eat, afilu kemeya da amre lo tzarech l'didei shaminun. Right? If the fellow says that he needs to eat, so then we listen to him, even if there, says Mar Ravashi, even if there are 100 doctors who say that he does not need to eat, we listen to him. Shenemar lev yodea maris nafsho, as the pasuk says, that a fellow's heart knows exactly what he needs. It's not, we learn in the Mishnah, ein sham bikin ma'achilin oso api atzmo. But one second, my Ravashi, how could you say that? How could you say that if he says that he needs to eat, then that's that? We don't listen to however many doctors say he does not. But the Mishnah says, that if you don't have multiple doctors saying that he should not be eating, so then we listen to himself, implying that if you have multiple doctors saying he should not be eating, then he doesn't eat. But if there are a number of doctors saying that he should not be eating, so then he should not be eating. This is how you have to read it. This is how you have to understand it. But when do we say that we listen to the doctors? When he says that I don't need to eat. But when do we listen to the doctors? When he says I don't need to eat. But if he says I do need to eat, so then no matter what, it's as if there are no doctors arguing to the contrary. We listen to himself, as the pasuk says that a heart knows its own bitterness, right? So Mar Ravashi wants to understand the Mishnah to say that when a fellow says that he needs to eat on Yom Kippur, then no matter what, we treat it as if there are no doctors around. You can have 1,000,000 doctors saying you don't need to eat. If he says he needs to eat, that's it. He eats. Okay, Givaldi, that sounds good to me. New Mishnah. Mishachazo bulmus machilin also afilu dvarim tmeim ad she'oru einav. So a fellow who gets this bulmus sickness. Now, this bulmus sickness seems to come from a lack of eating. That if you haven't been eating enough, so you can get this bulmus disease. Now, my understanding is that this is not necessarily talking about Yom Kippur. This is talking about just in general. So if a fellow gets this bulmus disease, you could feed him even non-kosher foods until his eyes lighten up, because apparently a effect of this bulmus disease is that your eyes somehow get affected, cloudy, I don't know, somehow affected, but you could feed him even non-kosher things if you need to until his eyes kind of light up and get back to how they should be. A fellow who was bitten by a foolish dog. The Gemara is going to explain what that means. And also, you don't feed him from its liver lobe. Apparently there was a Baba Maisa that if you would get bitten by a stupid dog, not my words, the Mishnah's words, if you would get bitten by a kelev shota, so then apparently there was some party hack where you could, if you ate dog liver, so that was the remedy. But the Mishnah says we don't buy it, and therefore no eating dog livers to fix dog bites. For Masi Mecharish Mater, Masi says no. What do you mean? It's a real Indian. It's a real thing, and therefore Rav Masi ben Chorosh says that you can feed a fellow dog liver lobe stuff if he gets bitten by a dog. V'od Amar Rav Masi ben Chorosh, and similarly says Rav Masi, and additionally says Rav Masi ben Chorosh, hachoshesh begrono, a fellow who his throat hurts him, matilin lo sam b'soch piv b'Shabbos, you can give him some kind of medicine on Shabbos, mipneshu Safek nefashos uchol safek nefashos dochas Shabbos, because this disease starts in the mouth, but it could get really bad, and therefore it is essentially safek nefashos. It's life and death, and therefore it's dochas Shabbos, and he could eat this medicine on Shabbos. Mishenafla of mapoles, if like a house collapsed. Unfortunately, this is shtickle current events right now. But if you have a building that collapses, safek usham, safek eno sham, and you're not sure if there's a fellow trapped in there, safek chai, safek meis, we don't know if the fellow or the people are alive or dead. Safek kusi, safek yisrael, we don't know if they're yidden or not yidden. Mefakhin olav sagal, so we could clear away the debris so that we could find people and save people. If you find them alive, so then you could save him and take him out. If you find the fellow dead, so then on Shabbos it would be muksa, so you wouldn't take out the mace. But until it gets to that point, if you don't know if the fellow or the people are alive or dead, so then you can continue the search efforts on Shabbos until you and hopefully you'll find them alive. Taner Rabbanon, the Rabbi's taught, says the Gemara, I know you Yodin Sheiru Einov. How do we know, at what point is it considered that his eyes have lit up? Mishayavchin bin Tov Lira, from once he can already differentiate between good and bad. Amabai v'taima, it's talking about taste. Alright. And I guess once he can taste between things that he likes and he doesn't like, so then it's considered his eyes have lit up and he doesn't have to worry about bulmus anymore. He's cured. Taner Rabbanon, the Rabbi's taught, Mishachazu bulmus, a fellow who's got this bulmus situation, machlin also akal. So, if in the event that you have to feed him something not kosher or something that should not be eaten, so preference goes to things that are less bad, are less usr. What does that mean? Tevel nevela, machlin also nevela. So if you have to make a choice between feeding the fellow tevel, untithed produce, or nevela, right, an animal that hasn't been slaughtered, so the preference goes to nevela because nevela is a lav and tevel is misa bidei shamayim. Tevel shvius, if it's between eating tevel or shvius food, right, food that you shouldn't be eating on shvius, right, so you hid it away or whatever it is. Tevel uchuma, right, so preference goes to shvius because it's a mitzvah saseh, it's not whereas tevel is misa b'dei shamayim. Tevel uchuma tanahi. But what if the choice is between tevel, which is, if anybody eats tevel, it's misa b'dei shamayim, or truma, which if you're a zar, if you're a non-Kohen, truma is also misa b'dei shamayim. So you're between a rock and a hard place, right? You have this fellow, he is sick. The only options are to feed him either tevel or truma, both of which are misa b'dei shamayim. Which one gets preference? So Tanoi staka machlokas Tanoi. The Tanya is we learn in the Brayso. Machilin also tevel ve'machilin also truma. Bentem omer truma v'lo tevel. So nice clean machlokas. Tanakama says feed the fellow tevel. Bentem says feed the fellow the truma. Omer Rabba says Rabba echad efshe b'chulin to chuliam lo plige t'maskinan le umasfinan le. Says Rabba, look, if you could feed him the chulin, everyone agrees that you feed him chulin. What does that mean? It means that let's say you have to feed the guy, half a pound of, something, right? Whatever it is, this tevel stuff. Now, the thing is, so tevel, of course, you could just separate trumas and maasros, and then you have chulin, right? So Rabbi is saying, look, if you have enough of this produce or whatever it is, that you could separate truma, and then once you separate the truma, you have chulin, and there'll be enough chulin to feed the guy. I don't know, this thing I made up, a half pound or whatever. So there's enough chulin to feed the guy after separating trumas, so it's a no-brainer. Obviously, separate We're going to explain the Gemara as a little more details, but for now let's just say it's a no-brainer. Separate the truma. You're left with the chulin. If there's enough chulin to feed the fellow, perfect. So it says Rabbah, if you could separate the truma, and then by doing that, it's no longer tevel, and you don't need to eat the truma because there's enough chulin now without it, so then no-brainer. Separate the truma and feed him the chulin. However, the machlokas is when there would not be enough chulin after the truma is separated, and therefore, in order to, treat his illness, he would have to eat the entire amount of what is now tevel. And therefore, the question is, do you separate the truma? In which case, part of what he's going to be eating is going to be chulin, but he has to eat the whole thing, including the part that's not truma. So, do you separate truma semaisris? In which case, he's going to be eating partially chulin, but also partially truma. Or do we say, no, just leave it as tevel and just eat, feed him the whole thing now, as it is now as tevel? Ki pligi b'telo efshar b'chulin. So the machlokas is when there just would not be enough chulin left after the truma is separated. So mar sovar tevel chamur. So Ben Tema says that tevel is more serious, is more stringent than truma, and therefore you should feed him the truma. Mar sovar truma chamur. Whereas Tanakama says no, feed him the tevel because the truma is more severe. Masover tevel chamor aval truma chazi l'koyin. So Tanakama says, look, feed. Wait, who is this? Now I'm confused. Where am I? Machlin also tevel. Okay, so Ben Tema says that you should feed him truma. Wait, where am I? Now I'm lost. Marsavar tevel chamor. So who could tell me? Who says that tevel is more chamor and therefore you should feed him truma? So Ben Tema says truma. Okay, so this is Ben Tema's opinion. So Ben Tema says that you should feed him truma because tevel is more severe. Why is tevel more severe? Because nobody can eat tevel. Truma, at least some people can eat truma. Kohanim can eat truma, which makes tevel more severe, and therefore preference goes to, in this case, if the fellow has this bulmus situation, so you can give him truma because it's less severe. Whereas the Tanakama says no, you should feed him tevel because truma is the more stringent. Why is truma more stringent? Because there's no way that a zar is ever going to be able to eat truma, right? If you're a zar, you can never eat truma, no exceptions. Whereas tevel, there's a way to eat tevel, which is separate truma and maisus, and now you can eat it as chulin, right? So there's a way to fix tevel, therefore it makes it not as stringent. Whereas truma, if you're not a Kohen, there's no chance you're ever going to be able to eat it. Okay, so that's the machlokas there in terms of truma versus tevel, which one is more chamor or not, and how does that apply for how you should eat a fellow who is sick and has the choice. It's machlokas Ben Tema and Tanakama. Fine. Effective Gemara, efshar b'chulin pshita. Well, it's so funny. I'm back in Eretz Yisrael, so you hear all the sounds from the street over there. Achoponim. So we said efshar b'chulin pshita, right? So Rabbah had said that if you can separate the trumas and there will be enough chulin left over, so you should do that. And as I was saying, it's a no-brainer, right? Then you avoid having to eat truma. It's no longer tevel because you separated truma, semaisis, feeding the chulin. Obviously, it's a no-brainer. To which the Gemara says, yeah, it is a no-brainer. Why does Rabbah have to state the obvious? Yeah, if you can feed him chulin, obviously feed him chulin. So l'tzricha b'Shabbos. So we're talking about, it's Shabbos. And on Shabbos, we don't separate truma semaisis. So the chiddush, the Rabbah is saying that even though it's Shabbos, and on Shabbos we generally don't separate truma semaisis, you would be allowed to separate it here in order to avoid eating, having to eat tevel. Fine. B'Shabbos nami pshita, tiltum midarbananu. To which the Gemara says, yeah, but Shabbos, this is still obvious. The reason we don't separate truma semaisis on Shabbos, sure, but it's only midarbanan. I think it was because it's like mesakin mana keilu, right? It's like you're fixing it. So we don't do it on Shabbos, but still, that's only midrabanan, and therefore, if it's a shaila between should we feed the fellow tevel, which is what's it called, misa b'dei shamayim, or should we just separate trumas and maisus? Obviously, we'll separate trumas and maisus. Midoraisa, you're allowed to separate trumas and maisus. So you hear that, Chevra? Here we're talking about, these items grew in a pot that doesn't have any holes in it. Rabbi Yoel Almog, remember we discussed this in Masechta Shabbos? Was it Daf Tzadi Gimel, Tzadi Daled, something like that? So here we're talking about an otzitz she'eno nakuv, that the produce that grows there is only chayv and trumas and ma'asos midrabanan anyways, and therefore the tevel is only midrabanan anyways. It didn't grow in the ground; it grew in a pot that it didn't have any holes or anything. It was completely separate from the ground, so it's only tevel midrabanan, and therefore the shaila is. So Rabbah is saying, look, even though it's only tevel midrabanan, right, and it's Shabbos. Rabba's chiddush is that still you would separate, right? Meaning, so it's only tevel midrabanan. So now, right? So you only have to separate trumas and ma'asos midrabanan, anyways. And it's Shabbos, which means that we have this other thing, which is that we don't separate trumas and ma'asos on Shabbos. Rabba's opinion is that nonetheless separate the trumas and ma'asos on Shabbos, so you can feed him the chulin rather than feeding him tevel midrabanan, out of concern that, well, if you if you feed him tevel here, you might feed him tevel in other places, and therefore Rabbah says just separate the trumas and ma'asos, even though it's only a tevel midrabanan, and then feed him the chulin. Right? Fine. So my saver tevel chamur, my saver truma chamur. Fine. Very good. And in this case also, fine. So we'll say that then. There is that opinion regarding what when you would not be able to separate the trumas and ma'asos and just feed the chulin. So then, is it better to feed the tevel, or is it better to separate the trumas and ma'asos and feed the chulin plus truma? That was that machlokas. Although technically you could actually get rid of this last line, so we can actually skip that. Lemon tanoi hi the tanya. So now the Gemara says that let's say that this is actually machlokas tanoim. This opinion of Rabbah. Right, Rabbah says that in the event, so you have this tevel d'Rabbanan, and it's Shabbos, which means that separating trumas and ma'asos is something that we don't do midrabanan on Shabbos. And Rabbah says, look, everyone agrees that if you can separate these trumas and ma'asos and then be able to feed the chulin, Rabbah says, look, do that even though it's Shabbos and we don't generally separate trumas and ma'asos on Shabbos. Separate it so you can feed chulin, even though we're only talking about tevel midrabanan anyway. So let's say that Rabbah's assertion is actually machlokas tanoim. The Tanya, as we learn in the Brisa, mishnashachu nachash, a fellow who's bitten by a snake, korin lo rofe mimakom lemakom. So we can call up a doctor on Shabbos. Umikarin lo es atanagoles, and you can rip open a chicken and put the chicken blood on the wound. V'gozne lo es akrishin, and you can harvest leeks to feed him. Umaychilin also, and you give him to eat. Vein tzarich la'aser divrei Rebbe, and you don't need to take any meiser. That is the opinion of Rebbe. Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon Omer lo yochal ad shi'asa. So Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon says that you have to separate meiser. Now, leeks are only chayiv in trumas and meiser midrabanan. Right, I think that Mida or rice is the only thing that are chayim trumas ma'asos. I think is ma'aser dagon tirosha v'tzarecha. I believe grains, grapes, and oil and olives. I think are the only things that are chayiv in trumas ma'asos Mida or rice. Everything else is chayiv midrabanan, and therefore leeks are only chayiv midrabanan. And we see that you have a fellow who's sick and it's Shabbos, and Rebbe is saying that you should separate. So Rebbe says that you don't need to separate trumas and ma'asos. You could just feed him the leeks, which are essentially tevel midrabanan. Whereas Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon says that you should separate ma'asos, like Rabbah, right? We'll say Rabbah is like Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, which is that better to separate, even though it's tevel midrabanan, better to separate trumas and ma'asos and feed him the chulin. So name Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon v'lo Rebbe. So let's say that Rabbah is like Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, not like Rebbe, afilu tema Rebbe. To which the Gemara says, no, you can even say that Rebbe is in accordance, right, is in line with what Rabbah is asserting, because Adkan Lokam Rebbe Hasam Elin and Meiser Yarok D'Rabbanan. Because Rebbe in this brisa, when he says that you do not need to separate trumas and ma'asos, that's Davka talking about leeks, which meaning leeks will never be chayav in Meiser Midoraisa, meaning it's not because of the fact that it was grown in an otzitz she'eno nakuv that it's only chayiv in trumas and ma'asos d'Rabbanan, that it's only tevel midrabanan. Meaning it's because it's a vegetable. It's something that inherently will never be chayiv in truma midoraisa, and therefore there's no concern that you might end up, making a mistake in some other situation where the leeks will be chayiv in truma midoraisa. No, it's never going to be chayiv in truma midoraisa. It's always only going to be truma midorabanan because it's not dagon tirash v'yitzar, and therefore that's why Rabbi says that you don't need to separate trumas and maasros. Aval b'maasros dagon the tevel doraisa afilu Rabbi mode tisharis le'ba'atzis she'eno nakuv also le'meichel ba'atzis shu nakuv. Right, but Rabbi would argue, in this situation where you have an item that's chayiv in trumas and maasros mida oraisa, however, just because it technically was grown in an atzitz she'eno nakuv, in a pot that doesn't have any holes in it, that is what makes it in this particular case only tevel mida abanon. Rabbi would argue that Rebbe would agree that in this case you would separate the trumas and maasros out of concern that in a different case where it grew in the ground and it's chayiv mida oraisa, you might end up doing the same thing, which is, if you don't separate trumas and maasros and you feed tevel, because you argue that, well, in this particular case it's derabanan, well, then you might end up feeding the tevel in a case where it's deoraisa as well, which would be a problem. Okay, fine. Taner Rabbanan the Rabbis Tamisha Achazo Bulmus Machilin also Dvash Chamine Mesika. So the Brisa teaches that a fellow who has this bulmus situation, so we can feed him honey and all sorts of sweet things. Because honey and sweet things brighten up a person's eyes. And even though we don't have a proof for this, we have a sort of what's it called? We don't have a proof, but we have like an illusion, maybe reference. Ru'una ki oru einai ki tamtima devash hazeh, because Yohanan says when he eats some of that sweet honey that I think then Shaul wants to kill him because of it. So he says, look, see how my eyes lit up because I had some of this very delicious honey. How come that's not a proof? We say, right, it's not a proof, it's just kind of like an illusion. How come it's not a proof? Because over there Yohanan didn't have this bulmus situation, therefore it's not exactly proof, but we do see that your eyes would light up from sweet things. Says Abai that honey only brightens up your eyes after eating, but before eating it's just going to make you hungrier. The apostle says that it says by David HaMelech that they found by David HaMelech when he was fighting Amalek, it sounds that they found in Egypt an Egyptian fellow in the field, David, and they took him to David, and they gave him bread, and he ate. They gave him to drink. They gave him sweet figs, and raisins. And then he ate, and he felt good because he hadn't eaten for 3 days and 3 nights. So we see that Dafka, you feed him the sweet things after. Right? It says that they gave him. Right, lechem vayocha, they gave him bread, and then afterwards they gave him this sweet stuff. Also aliyah b'dvash. It says of Nachman, the name of Shmuel, that a fellow who has this bulmus situation, we feed him the fatty tail of a lamb with honey. Rav Yeshua says even fine flour with honey. Rav Papa says even barley flour with honey. So we see the common denominator being the honey, the sweetness. Rabbi Yochanan says, Rabbi Yochanan pamachas achazani bulmus. One time I had this bulmus disease. So I knew that let me run to the figs and chop the figs from the eastern part of the tree where the sun shines, because that's where they're going to be sweetest. And he said, look, this is a pasuk in Koheles that says that wisdom brings life to a person, i.e. that Rabbi Yochanan was saying, well, let's read a shtickle weiter for a second. The Tani Rav Yosef, the Rav Yosef taught how it's litom tam te'eno yifana lemizracha, that if somebody wants to have a very sweet fig, so he should take it from the eastern part of the tree. Shenemar mimeget v'os shamash, that mimeget from like maidanim, from delicacies, come from the sun, and therefore if you eat the figs from the eastern part of the tree, that is where they will be sweetest. So Reb Yochanan needed something sweet because he had this bulmus situation, so he knew that what he should do is he should run and chop the very sweet figs, the sweetest figs, which are from the east of the tree, and he said, look, because I knew this brisa, because I had this wisdom, I was able to bring myself to heal myself, to treat myself. So we see that wisdom, knowledge is power. Wisdom is, can save you. Zog the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi Abu Kazli B'Orcha. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi were traveling together. Gewaldig. Achze Bumos Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda got this Bumos. Kapche Liroe Achle Rifta. So he sort of forced a shepherd to give him his bread. Alright. Amr Rabbi Yossi, Kapachta Saroya. Rabbi Yossi says to Rabbi Yehuda, look what you did. You forced this shepherd to give you bread. Kimatu Lamata Achze Bumos Rabbi Yossi. Sure enough, they got to where they needed to go. And then Rabbi Yossi got this bulmus. Ahaju Baal gave it soy, and then the whole town came and they were giving him jars of like honey and platters of food. Rabbi Yehuda says to Rabbi Yossi, look, I just sort of forced one shepherd to give me some food. You forced the entire city to come out and give you stuff. All right. Rabbi Yossi Abu Kazli B'Orcha. And another time, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yossi were traveling. Rabbi Meir Ava Daik B'Shma, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi Avu Daiki B'Shma. Very interesting. Rabbi Meir sort of paid attention to the names of things, and is like, if he didn't get a good vibe from like a name, he'd be like, no, we ain't doing this. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, they weren't so into like the whole name vibes. Kimatu Lau Duchta. So when they got to a certain place, Ba'u Ushpiza. So they wanted to rest at that, they wanted to find lodging in a certain place. Yavu lihu. What? Kimatu lahu duchta ba'u ushpiza. Yavu lihu. What does yavu lihu mean over here? What? I don't know. But they got a place to. Oh, okay, I get it. Kimo lahu duchta. When they got to a certain place, ba'u ushpiza. So they said, hey, is there a place for us to stay? Where's the kretschmer? Yavu lihu, they say, Darton. Darton's the kretschmer. So Amrulo Mashimcha. So they said to the is there like a funny Yiddish name for like the innkeeper? Probably not. So anyways, they say to the fellow, like, what's your name? Amru Kidur. So he says, my name is Kidur. Amr Shmamino Adam Rashu. To which your mayor is like, I don't like the feelings of this Kidur. Shenamar Kidur Tapucho Sema. The pasuk says in Ha'azinu Kidur Tapucho Sema that they are a generation of backwards people. So that's not a good sign. So Meir says, this guy's name is Kidor Tapucho Sema. I don't trust him. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi Ishlimu Lekisayu. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, they weren't paying to these name vibes. They weren't paying attention to name vibes. So they said, all right, yeah, cool. Let's stay here for Shabbos. And they gave Kidor their wallets to guard for them. Rabbi Meir lo Hashem le Kisei. Rabbi Meir held onto his wallet. Ozol Osve Be Kivri Davua, and he hid it by the grave of the innkeeper's father. And the innkeeper had a dream, and in the dream he dreamt that he should really go to his father's grave because there's going to be money there. And the next day, on Shabbos morning, the innkeeper said, I had such a funny dream. I dreamt that I should go to my father's grave because there's money there. Ha ha ha. Amre le chamad ve'shimshe leizbu mamasha. To which they said to him, it was just nonsense. Friday nights, on Friday nights, as Rashi says, because it's Shabbos, you don't have anything to worry about, so therefore your mind can go to strange places. They said, it's a joke. There's nothing there. Quickly, Azar Reb Meir v'natri kula Yoma. Reb Meir went and he was guarding his wallet the entire day. Ve'aisei, and then after Shabbos he brought it. Because he did not trust this guy. He's like, wait, something is weird here. This guy's going to come check out his father's grave and steal my money. So therefore, Meir wanted to make sure that wasn't going to happen. Now, the next day, then, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda, who left their wallets with this innkeeper, they said to him, Havlon Kisan, okay, now can we get our wallets back? He said to them, what wallets? To which Rabbi Meir said to them, this isn't surprising to me. I mean, I didn't leave my wallet with him. The guy's name is Kidor. Kidor Tapucho Sema. Obviously, you shouldn't be leaving your wallet with a fellow named Kidor. So Amrule, Amaylo Amartlan. So they said to him, well, why didn't you tell us this? So Amrlu, he said to them, Emer da Amri ona chashashach zuki mi Amri. He says, look, I mean, it's not like is that what it's called? Like a set in stone? I feel like there's a better word for this. This isn't like a foolproof thing. Hard, fast rule. I feel like that's what I'm looking for. But, whatever. I can't prove this. It's not like it was a hard, fast rule that like this guy, because his name is Kedor, definitely you can't trust him. But like, it was kind of like a vibe. It was like, I don't know, I'm not trusting this guy. His name is Kedor, so I left it with me. So I left my wallet with me under my own sort of control. But, I couldn't necessarily tell you outright, like, don't trust this guy. So they went to the store where the innkeeper was. They saw that he had lentils on his lips. They then went to his wife and they said to his wife, hey, you have our wallets. Your husband said that you should give them back to us. And here's the sign. The sign is, we know what you had for lunch. You had lentils for lunch. And she's like, yeah, that's true. We did have lentils for lunch. Okay, I guess really they did speak to my husband and he told them that I should give them their wallets. Okay. So so they got their money back from his wife and they went on their merry way. And then the innkeeper, the corrupt innkeeper, went and killed his wife for giving the wallets back to Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda. This is that which we learn in the Brisa, that if you have a fellow who's got like like some kind of a restaurant where there's Jews and non-Jews there, so if the people come in and they wash their hands before they eat, then obviously they're Jewish, so you shouldn't give them the non-kosher food. But if they come in and they don't wash their hands, then they're not Jewish, you can give them the non-kosher food. Now if a fellow neglects to do my machronim, well, it could end up being a situation of life and death, as we see with this innkeeper. He didn't do my machronim, i.e., he had some lentils on his lips, and that was enough to create a story for Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi to come to his wife and say, look, you had lentils for lunch, and she ended up dying because of it, all because this guy didn't do my machronim. If he did my machronim and washed his hands and then washed his face, then he wouldn't have had lentils and his wife would still be alive today. And in the end, all three of them, Reb Meir, Reb Yossi, and Reb Yehuda, were on the name vibe bandwagon. When they got to a certain place called Bala, Lo Ailu Lagabe, they didn't go into this place. Amish Mamina Rasha, this fellow must be a Rasha. If his name is Bala, Dichsiv Va'amar Levala Niufim, right? And he said to a person who is involved in inappropriate relationships. So Bala is in that context. So they said, look, we're just going to stay out of this chevra. That was Daf Pei Gimel, Daf 83 of Masechta Yoma. So the first part discussed the situation where you have can a fellow eat on Yom Kippur? And essentially where we got to was the initial understanding is that, look, if a fellow says that he needs to eat, so we listen to him. However, if there are two doctors that say you don't need to eat, so then we no longer listen to him. According to Mabar of Ashi, even if there's a million doctors who say he doesn't need to eat, if he says he needs to eat, he needs to eat. However, in a situation where he says he doesn't need to eat and a doctor says he does need to eat, so then he does eat. Then we got to this new Mishnah about, it was an interesting Mishnah that if a fellow is sick with this bulmus disease, you can feed him even non-kosher food. Now we got this interesting machlokas about what happens if you have to choose between tevel and truma. So the Tanakama says that you should feed him tevel, right, rather than feed him truma, and Ben Tema says that you should feed him truma rather than tevel. And then Rabbah pointed out that, however, in a situation where you could separate truma from the tevel and there would be enough chulin left, so then memele, you should do that, because that way you'll be feeding him chulin, right? To which you said that that's obvious. And we said it's talking about an otzitz she'eno naku. It's talking about that. Well, it's actually talking about these produce that was grown in a pot that is not connected to the ground, and therefore it's only tevel midrabanan anyways. And we're saying that you should separate the trumas and maisus, which we don't necessarily do on Shabbos in general, but in order to prevent a situation where you might end up eating chulin in the future, so we say just separate the we might end up eating truma in the future, tevel in the future. If you don't separate the trumas and maisus, say separate the trumas and maisus, even though it's Shabbos, since it's even though it's only truma midrabanan, tevel midrabanan. Oh my gosh. Okay, and then we got up to we discussed that it's good to have sweet things in order to save yourself from bulmus. And then we got to that interesting story at the end about being medayik bishma, that if to be able to tell from the name of a person if they're a good guy or a bad guy. That was Daf Pei Gimel, Daf 83 of Masechta Yoma. I hope you enjoyed it. Cheers.